I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch. Welcome to On Watch, everybody, the Judicial Watch podcast, where we take a deep dive behind the headlines to cover news stories the mainstream media would rather you not know about at all. We try to recover some lost history. We try to explain the inexplicable. We appreciate you joining us, whether you're watching us on the video version of this podcast or listening to us on one of the streaming platforms like Spotify or whatever else you're listening to out there. Thanks for taking the time. We appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating. And also contact us. Let us know what you want covered, what you want to see us talk about, who you want us to interview. We appreciate your input. It's great stuff. So today we have a wonderful guest, the investigative reporter for the Daily Caller, Jennie Taer. Welcome, Jennie.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on. So for those of you who don't know, Jennie's investigative work on the border, on immigration issues, border security, the myriad of topics having to do with our vulnerabilities at the border. She's broken some tremendous stories, and she's really, don't want to say old hand. That sounds kind of negative. For a young person, she has tremendous amount of experience, years of knowing what's really going on, excellent sources. You've uncovered things the government would probably not have uncovered or revealed. And you know what's going on, whether it's human trafficking, drug smuggling, terrorism, human beings being trafficked. You know the story. So welcome to On Watch.
Thank you. Yes, I feel I'm privy almost sometimes to too much information, and it is very alarming what I've learned, of course.
Yep. Yeah. It is. I jokingly say it's like a curse, but like once you pull the veil back and you see what's really going on, you can't like unknow that or not having seen what's happened. So you and I have actually worked together on and off for literally years.
Yes.
We've done some documentary work on, in particular, one story about fentanyl crossing the border and the consequences of the number one killer of Americans 18 to 45. But there's two stories in particular I want to talk about, and I'll give you free rein to do whatever you want. And that is a story about an Shabaab terrorist that you broke. It's your story. Yeah. And then also the insanity of what is going on, not just in Atlanta. Atlanta is the example. It's other places too. But the Atlanta airport human smuggling lounge.
Oh my goodness.
That the government set up.
Where do we even begin with all of that?
So two great stories. You broke them. Let our viewers and listeners understand your work and how you got there on those stories.
Yeah, so I'll start with the Shabaab terrorist story.
Sure.
I think this is something that a lot of people have questioned. Well, who are these people on the terror watch list that Border Patrol has nabbed? Because we've seen a huge spike in those apprehensions at the border,
right, and
the northern border as well. So who are these people? Well, we've recently obtained a memo showing that ICE had nabbed this Shabaab terrorist. Who was this guy? Where did he come from? What's his story? Well, the story is he came across the southern border and was apprehended by Border Patrol back in March. Well, it was only a few days ago, so this is January, that ICE nabbed him. Okay, how did he get through? How did he get released by Border Patrol? Well, right, on this memo, they said he was a mismatch on the terror watch list at the time. That's what they deemed him in order to release him. So he made it all the way to Minnesota. Within almost a year of being released, was nabbed and found to be actually a match on the terror watch list. He was an Shabaab member from Somalia, 27 years old, had crossed the border through California.
Okay.
And he made his way all the way up to Minnesota, like we said. And Minnesota currently, right now, this situation, in the wake of all of this, is trying to become a sanctuary state.
I was going to say, did he check in with Ilhan Omar when he got up to Minnesota?
Her office has been eerily silent on this.
Yeah.
I did reach out.
I would imagine that she would be his greatest advocate. So
yeah,
I mean, I'm sort of being facetious, but
sure,
maybe not. It's outrageous what she's said and done. But anyway, so he crosses in California. So he lit up to somebody. They initially thought, hey, wait a minute, we got somebody.
Yes.
And then they said, no, it's not the right guy. Cut him loose.
Absolutely. That's exactly.
And so he makes his way up to Minnesota. And do we know what he was doing or where he was hanging out or who he was meeting with or any details
The
on
details that we know about what he was doing for al-Shabaab, at least, was the weapons and explosives manufacturing, transportation, all of that was tied to him in this memo. That's what he was responsible for, according to ICE. And so ICE said, we did ask the acting director of ICE yesterday at a press conference.
I saw a video clip of that. Yep.
Yes. So, I asked him flat out because ICE had yet to respond to my queries about this. We had the memo, we reported on it, we have great sourcing on this situation, but ICE was for a week silent. And it was interesting because I was going back and forth with them and they're like, well, you gotta give us a name, you gotta give us an alien number, we need more information.
You're supposed to have more information than they do about their criminal suspect.
Right, and I eventually just said to them in my last email, well, how many al-Shabaab terrorists are there? Because you should know this is a specific area of operation that I'm talking to. So actually today they just confirmed as well that he was a Somali citizen, he was 27 years old, they kind of gave more biographic information.
Right. So when you say that there was some connection or some information pertaining to explosives, what was the context of that? How did that information, explosives and this guy, but what's the connection? Fill in the blanks on that.
Well, I think we're trying to figure out what all this means because we only have this snippet detail from a larger memo of kind of the situational report of the day and what these officers are doing. So there's still so much we should, try to learn from this.
So this may be this guy's expertise. He may be a bomb guy, is what it. So he's not a logistics guy. He's not a guy moving stuff for them. He's a guy who has some facility or some knowledge in the handling of explosive material.
That's what this memo points to, exactly. Okay. So for someone like that to be in the country for almost a year, what were they able to accomplish? And I there's some folks that are questioning, well, your reporting shows that this guy was apprehended, and so, he never actually committed an attack, so this is all great. And to me, I'm thinking, well, one, we don't know what he accomplished during those months.
Right.
You don't necessarily have to be the one carrying out the attack. In fact, when I look at the border and think of the millions of people streaming across, the people that are on the terror watch list are the ones we know about. What about what happened in 9/11? You're not a terrorist until you are a terrorist, right? Until you commit the act.
Exactly.
So that's something to also think about with these cases.
Yeah, I mean, that really is very accurate. So you have people that are unlawfully present, like the 9/11 hijackers, and you can say, well, they haven't done anything. Okay, well, that's a great expression or something to say on 9/10. But on 9/12, that excuse vanishes, right? So the fact that you haven't caught them in the act doesn't mean that they're Boy Scouts, right? And this guy has some affiliation with al-Shabaab, or he never would have lit up in the first place, even if it was a mismatch. And now you do find him, and there's some connection to explosives, whether he knows how to do it, or he's training people how to do it, or he's whatever. So the idea that, oh, well, he hasn't done anything yet, it just does not float. This is a crazy mentality to take.
Yes.
So you sort of cheerfully and politely confronted the acting ICE director.
Yes, that is correct.
And said, so what's the deal? What was his reply? How did he engage with you?
He absolutely confirmed what happened, but I asked him a specific question of how many terrorists have gotten through the border and been caught in the interior by ICE.
Right.
And he did not answer that question.
Which you would think he would be thrilled to announce, right? He'd say, look, it's unfortunate that these bad guys got through, but we've captured 20, 100, whatever the number is, and that they would be able to be proud of that their enforcement, because that's the CE, Customs Enforcement, Immigration Customs Enforcement.
Yes.
The enforcement part of ICE would think that they'd want to proclaim how they caught bad guys, but they're not interested in talking about that.
This is kind of the general theme because I was able to get a second question in, and what I asked him was the Biden administration, Mayorkas, and the director actually said this yesterday, but they have set a number of priorities limiting ICE's ability to make arrests. And they wrote in a memo, Mayorkas wrote, that the reason that someone is arrested should not be solely because they're here illegally. And I asked him flat out, does this send the wrong message? Does this invite people to come? Don't you think that that would be how people receive this? And he said no, which the numbers tell a different story, of course.
They've advertised, come and get it. You know, it's wide open. I think there's even I'm trying to place the source on this, but there was I want to say it's a Chicago alderman who was furious and talking about how, of course, people are coming to Chicago. We're giving them free housing, free health care, a $9,000 stipend, blah, 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 blah. He listed all the things that somebody unlawfully present in Chicago is eligible for one way or the other. And he essentially was saying, you'd have to be an idiot not to come here if we're giving you all this stuff for free. So it's even dawning on some career Democratic operative alderman in Chicago that the environment that they've created is a magnet. It was always bad, but now it's off the rails. It's crazy.
Right, and I think that also speaks to these efforts by Republican Governor Greg Abbott and others to basically dump migrants in these sanctuary cities and say, you asked for it, and now they're not just coming on those buses, they're coming on their own. Like you said, there's a lot of pull factors. I think a lot of the media, I think a lot of people that are talking about this issue try to talk about all of the push factors and everything happening in the Western Hemisphere, and this is a hemispheric problem. But why are they going to places like Chicago and Philadelphia and California across the board?
Right, right. Which points to another story that is exclusively yours that you broke, and that had to do with what essentially is the Ambassador Club. It's the illegal alien lounge being run by the government, or at least subsidized by it, in the Atlanta airport. Atlanta's not alone, but your reporting is on Atlanta. Tell us about that story.
Right. So we obtained this video. A state senator from Georgia had been tipped off by a whistleblower to this room full of illegal immigrants in the Atlanta Hartsfield Airport, which we know is one of the busiest airports in the country.
Yep.
Found this room. In front of it is what appears to be a soldier in uniform.
He's wearing a drill instructor hat.
Yes.
Is what he's wearing, which is kind of unique that, because most soldiers running around do not wear that headgear. It's very distinctive, unique. It's a Smokey the Bear hat for people who aren't familiar with that, but it's a brown Smokey the Bear hat, campaign hat they call it. And that's what drill instructors wear. So it's very peculiar that a DI from who knows what particular base appears to be detailed to sit outside this lounge, but please go ahead.
Yes, at the Atlanta airport. I mean, there's a room, and you can see in this video, there's a room full of these people, and they're holding their manila envelopes and their documents, and the group helping them, the NGO helping them, is talking the state senator through this, saying, we helped these recently, I think he said recently documented travelers, which is a new one. I haven't heard that one yet, but that's how he phrased it.
Yeah.
And helping them get to their destinations around the country, which is interesting because they're going through Atlanta, so maybe they cross the border in Texas and they're flying through and they need someone to escort them, which is what this NGO does. And actually,
and specifically, the NGO, based on the T-shirt they're wearing, was Team Liberty.
Yes.
That's the name of the NGO. And I'm happy to tell you that we have filed a barrage of FOIA requests with Homeland Security, DOD, and everybody else you can imagine, because we're very interested to find out how much Team Liberty is making, providing these babysitting/escort services, because it's a cottage industry, right?
Yes.
There's all sorts of, a lot of these folks are sort of well-meaning do-gooders. I don't think they necessarily have, malice in their hearts or whatever, but they figured out a way to kind of make this be a revenue generator for them. Sadly, there's a lot of churches that are involved, and they think they're being kind and good, and I guess in a certain way they are, but they're really facilitating a broader criminal activity because all these people are being trafficked one way or the other, right?
Yeah.
Because nobody crosses the border without paying the cartels.
Right.
Nobody. So in some way, they're facilitating a crazy problem for the country. But anyway, so this guy's standing at the door, and he's telling the state senator what?
He's telling him that they're helping them get to their destinations, and the state senator identifies himself as a state senator and says he just wants to make sure there's no human trafficking, essentially, that he's concerned about that issue.
Which, of course, there are. That the whole room is full of trafficked people, but yeah.
It's crazy. So they, he said, I want to take a closer look, and I want to take a video, basically. He holds up his camera, and it's swatted out of his hand, and then you can't see anything else. And he told me that that was the service member that was there that did that and said, you're done. So it appears that the service member was possibly guarding this room. I reached out to the airport. They said that they work with Team Libertad, which is the group you mentioned.
Yeah.
But that the Pentagon can't seem to provide any clarity on this military member, this guy who appears to be a military member.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he's doing some kind of private security gig or what, but it certainly is interesting.
That's really weird. That is really weird. So why do you think they got all freaked out if the guy wanted to take a picture of what's going on? I mean, it's an airport. It's a public space.
Right.
There is zero sort of sense or expectation of privacy in a public place like an airport. Zero. So, I mean, arguably you're under constant surveillance, right? There's cameras all over the place. The irony, of course, is that a lot of these illegal aliens don't need to present documentation to travel.
Correct.
There's a memo out saying that they could even refuse to be photographed upon clearing security in the airport. Which I don't think you can do.
No.
I think you have to present photo ID, don't you?
I had to do this the other day where I had my photo taken and I was like, this is new. I know certain people don't have to do this, but we also, a couple years ago, had reported that ICE arrest warrants count as ID at airports. So not only, you don't necessarily need your photo ID, which they drop so many of their IDs at the border. I've collected so many. I have bags of them. And on top of that, they're traveling through commercial airports and they're not using ID, but maybe they're using their arrest warrant. Maybe they're using their notice to appear, which is their court date document. And then I think about this case of this Shabaab terrorist.
Right.
How did he get to Minnesota? Was he on one of our flights? Because that's what's terrifying about this situation is not only was he able to get in, but how did he get all the way to Minnesota?
Right.
I don't think he walked.
And what exactly was his path? So he crosses to California. Is he hanging out in San Diego with other bomb makers and then getting on a plane? I mean, I asked that rhetorically, but you mentioned just a second ago that you've seen, and you have, tons of IDs that are dropped at the border. Explain that for people. Why would somebody, Carlos from Honduras decides to go north, and he makes the trek, and he gets to the border, and then all of a sudden he ditches his ID. Why is he doing that? What's the purpose of dropping or losing your ID?
I'll give you one scenario that's interesting is when, let's say a Haitian comes across the border, because we see this a lot. They come through, they might have an ID from Chile, and they had residency there, they were legal there, they were documented there.
They were granted asylum there?
Yeah, so if they are presenting that ID, it does not help. It may disqualify them for asylum in the United States, and it may send them right back because Chile's, and they will say this to me when I ask them, I'll question them at the border. Oh, you're from Haiti. How long, when did you leave Haiti? Oh, 2 years ago. Oh, where were you living for those 2 years? Oh, Chile. Was it safe? Did you like it? Yeah, it was great. We had good jobs. I mean, they're very open with me.
Yeah.
And then I figure out that this is a growing trend because I've talked to many of them. Even I've talked to some of them at the northern border. You'd be surprised, but the northern border is seeing a big surge right now. I've met Haitians up there that have crossed from Canada into the United States. and it's a similar story as well.
And it seems like a roundabout route, but the Canadians, our dear friends to the north, are not really too tough on the whole immigration, asylum, where do you want to go, what do you want to do thing. And so and that's in part why the numbers have increased so much, because there's almost too much attention on the southern border. And if you can make your way, if there's somehow you can pay, if you have a little bit of money and you want to pay extra, it's probably easier to enter via Canada than it is, because there's just so much attention on the southern border. Give me an example, if you can, of, at the outset we talked about getting sort of a peek behind the curtain and seeing what's really horrifically bad that most people don't know about or don't appreciate. If you can, maybe one or two things that you think folks at home, they may have a vague idea, but they really don't understand like the huge consequences or impact, something that's kind of unspoken about the border, security, immigration, anything like that.
You know, I talk to a lot of sources all the time, and I'm just getting daily updates from them, from people in ICE, from people in Border Patrol, from local law enforcement. And I think the resounding message from all of them is that what's happening at the border is all over the country right now. It's become a huge problem for law enforcement specifically. The national security element of all of this. I get texts, we just got this guy, you know, he was al-Shabaab on the terror watch list, but he came through and a year later was nabbed. We, you know, have this problem in, you know, across the eastern part of the country with Romanians that have come across that are committing, you know, petty financial crimes and then going from town to town, and we can't seem to nab them. All kinds of stories like this is what I hear, and there's always this nexus to the southern border and the northern border, of course, but to the illegal immigration coming across, to those, you know, it paints a picture of those 2.2 million people that Border Patrol documented coming across in fiscal year 2022, and then the 2 million in fiscal year 2023, and now the 600,000 so far in, you know, the 2024 fiscal year. Yes, exactly. So I see a glimpse of who those people are, and it's very alarming.
I think that the reporting we've seen out of New York in the last couple of days, where kind of a mob crowd jumps and attacks two NYPD officers. I mean, they're really lucky the officers didn't open fire. That would have completely reversed the story. Then they would have been horrible victims who had been suffering at the brutality of the police. But they viciously attacked these two police officers and just beat the hell out of them. And then they walk. No bail. That's anecdotal, and it gets coverage because it's New York. But I mean, there's probably 100 other, I'm not saying exactly like that, but there's 100 other instances where there's unlawful criminality, where there's theft, where there's intimidation, where there's those sorts of, it's street crime, really, where that's going all around the country, and the reporting, the coverage is next to zero. Or it's just anecdotal. It gets reported in the local paper, you know. The Peoria Times, you know, talks about something, but it never makes it to network news, never makes it to, doesn't even make it to X or to you know, online journalism. I think that's the growing drumbeat. I think there's going to be more and more and more of that seen. I don't know if that's your impression as well.
Yes, absolutely, and it's extremely unfortunate. And it's taxing these law enforcement agencies. I just spent a week in Maine because we had obtained a DHS memo showing that there were hundreds of Chinese illegal marijuana grows in that area. And went all across that state to find these properties, to knock on their doors, to see what's going on, to smell the marijuana unwillingly. So I saw that firsthand, and then I noticed this element of when I talked to the sheriff, and he didn't think to maybe talk to ICE about it, or he felt, well, I don't have enough deputies to deal with this, and this is so out of what I can do, I don't have the investigative power to go after the money laundering, to go to the border nexus, to the fentanyl nexus,
Right.
to maybe their ties to the Mexican cartels, because
Right.
that's what these tend to, involve. And so I think that these local agencies are very taxed by this issue.
Yeah, no one is going to associate the southern border crisis with Chinese guys in Maine growing pot. I mean, that's like hop, skip, jump. No, it just, and that's part of the problem is that there's a little bit of stereotyping where you figure, okay, it's all these Mexicans and Central Americans coming north, but it's not just Mexicans and Central Americans, right?
No.
It's all sorts of people from all over the globe. You just gave the example of Chinese guys in Maine growing pot, or Romanians you just talked about a few moments ago, running financial scams and rackets in the East Coast, or a Somalian up in Minnesota. We're not talking about Mexicans and Hondurans and Guatemalans. We're talking about people from far and wide. I think it's now 180 different countries that they've identified sneaking across the border. Any other kind of strange or unusual combinations of people and countries that you can think of?
Absolutely. I recently found myself in some Telegram channels that were being operated by Turkish smugglers, and they have an entire enterprise that's set up like a travel agency where you pay them $10,000 and they set up your travel from Istanbul or your country of origin to Istanbul and to Mexico, and then here's who you'll meet in Mexico, here's the hotel you'll stay at for the night, and then you'll cross into San Diego, and it's an entire enterprise. I actually talked to the smuggler. I didn't tell him who I was, but I just asked him what he does, and he confirmed to me everything, that he, helps people come illegally and from all over the world. He has routes. He said in one of his messages that he has a route specifically for people from Azerbaijan, which is extremely, that's just like the craziest one, because I've never encountered anyone at the border from there, but I'm sure Border Patrol has.
I'm very sure, yeah.
And so they'll help anyone. It's like this global enterprise that they have, just a couple of these guys running Telegram channels, and they seem to still be operating. And I've let DHS know, I've reached out to folks about it. Nothing has been done yet, but it was so alarming to see this situation where people are making so much money off of who knows who's coming in, because they also offer special assistance for those with criminal histories, because they know the system. They've done this so many times. They've had so many opportunities in the last couple of years to do the trial and error of smuggling. And most of the time, it's obviously very successful for them.
Yeah, they probably know the system better than most of the law enforcement people involved. Right?
Yeah.
They know how to beat it. It's a racket, and they've understood it. This is very interesting to me that you've gone to law enforcement and said, hey, look, I'm an investigative reporter, and I've been looking at X, Y, and Z, or I'm looking at, in this case, Telegram and these foreign smugglers and what they're up to, and you sort of give them this little intel scoop and say, you may or may not know this, but you need to check this out. What's the reception? I mean, I'm sure there's some people who are like, this is great, thank you so much. But I'm also pretty sure that there's others who go, yeah, okay, and they off to go get a coffee, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because I've gone to our illustrious Department of Justice with outrageous documented situations of criminality, and I've said, do you want to interview these people? I'll line them up for you, and they've told me no, right?
That's ridiculous.
There's an agenda, and the closer you get to the political aspect of it, all of a sudden people lose interest.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you have some great sources who would love your information, and there's probably some other people who are sort of like your acting ICE director who wasn't too interested in telling you about how many apprehensions they've made.
No. And you would think, like you said, you would think that would be something to celebrate and to say this is a success, because what he was announcing yesterday was about the arrest of individuals who came here illegally and were convicted or are being charged of child sex crimes. I mean, egregious cases here. And, why not add to, while we did this in a few days, like we're also nabbing this many terrorists and we're making sure the interior is secure. And that's just not the message they're sending. It's a stark contrast from the Trump administration and the Tom Homan ICE. It is so different.
Yeah. I don't know if you've reported on this. I am very certain that you're keenly aware of it, but it's an issue that makes me nuts. And that is the Biden administration has lost track of, charitably, and probably far more, at least 85,000 children, which is mind-boggling to me. We've had the lady on who was the whistleblower who was working in a facility and said, hey, wait a minute, what are you guys doing? You know, and she came out of the IG community, so she knew how to report it and how to push the buttons to make it stick. But I still haven't seen any real accountability for these 85,000. Now, who knows? It's probably 120,000. I'm guessing, I don't know. But how do you lose that many kids? And like, how is it that everyone goes home at night and goes to bed and doesn't worry about it?
Right.
That's what makes me nuts. I can't understand it.
No, and it's an entire pipeline that you have to look at, because when kids come alone across the border, Border Patrol apprehends them, then they hand them over to the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Refugee Resettlement. From there, they are connected with someone who's their sponsor in the United States. So it's often someone who may be their family member.
And that's where it gets weird.
Yeah,
that's where it gets really weird.
Exactly.
Because there's no way to know who these sponsors are, and there's no vetting done. And it appears that there's some people that show up and they're sponsoring 14, 18, 20 kids out of a 2-bedroom apartment. I mean, that's where the freaky part of it happens, is at that ORR part. That's
a common occurrence, people going to the same addresses across the board. It's not just the kids, but people putting the same addresses when they present to Border Patrol or ICE. So, but these children, yes, they do end up in these situations where they're exploited. And the New York Times did a great expose on this, because they ended up in these horrible labor conditions where they were working in snack factories and they were, getting injured. They were working long hours. It was a horrible situation, and it's happening, not just to one person, right? And the Department of Labor has opened an investigation into that, but the Department of Health and Human Services seems to, stand by their work in vetting the sponsors of these children, and often these kids are trafficked, and that's a real thing. It's not a conspiracy.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is, and it's so heartbreaking to see these children brought across the border alone, young kids. I mean, I know ranchers who will find them on their property.
Yeah, and then we're talking real little ones.
Yes.
I mean, she's talking like 4-year-olds, right?
Yes.
She gave a couple of other horrifying examples that I will not repeat here, but like your worst possible imagination of what was done to these children. And they just process them through like they're, it's mind-boggling. And HHS is still doing it. As we're sitting here talking today, I don't think there's been any substantial change. Maybe they launched an investigation, but if they were really serious, wouldn't you think they would shut it down? I mean, like, lower the boom and say, that's it, no, and have a radical overhaul, and I don't know what you do to fix it. If you gave me a couple hours, I could come up with a plan. But there's a way to stop it right now, right? Evidently, they don't care.
Right, and there's an element too of the children who come across who aren't in fact children.
Right.
So that's like a whole, they would have to do an entire wash of the agency and this process, because I've talked to teachers who are teaching these students in these schools that HHS uses, and one day the kid runs off and brings some of the other kids with them and never comes back. Come to find out that kid was 19 or 20 or 21, not a minor.
They just look like they're,
yes,
16-year-old or 14-year-old, but actually they're substantially older. Yeah.
Exactly.
You've done tremendous work, and you are to be congratulated.
Thank
and
you.
You've been doing it for years. This is not just you suddenly broke a couple of stories. You are really seasoned at this, and your reporting on all things concerning the border has been tremendous. whether it's human trafficking, drugs, terrorism, all the different sort of vulnerabilities, plus the human exploitation. You've done some really tremendous work. As we go to close out, I'm going to give you the last word. If there's something that you want to talk about, or a story, or an idea, or I want to make sure that we give you an opportunity to communicate with our folks and let them know about your work and what you've been doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think that the biggest thing when I think about this issue is that there's something in it for everyone to be concerned about. It's not a right or left thing, and I think that just being educated and reading these stories and looking at your local stories, because it's happening at a local level, and maybe questioning the reporting of local journalists and double check on your own as a private citizen, what you can do to ensure that, your community is knowledgeable about this. And I just really appreciate the platform to share all of this. So thank you, Chris.
You're very welcome. So I know that there's going to be folks who are going to be intrigued by this, and they're going to want to follow your work. So on social media or however else out there, let people know how to follow what you're up to and your writing and your reporting.
Yeah, you can follow me on X. It's Jennie Taer.
Very good, Jennie Taer. Jennie, congratulations again. Best wishes for all that you do.
Thank you.
I guarantee you that we'll be following your work, and if there's anything we can do to help, we're always here and available to you.
Appreciate that.
And I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today. It's reporting like you won't get anywhere else, and it really merits your attention because there's the national security aspect of it naturally, but there's also the human toll that is taken. And there's a phony, false compassion that's advanced by people talking about, oh, we're just trying to help immigrants. If you think helping somebody is putting them in the hands of the cartel or having them trafficked and exploited, then you're an idiot. All right? So we need to be really frank and honest and direct about this. You're not helping anybody by basically selling them to a Mexican drug cartel. So we have our own national security interests, obviously, but never forget the human component. I'm Chris Farrell, on Watch.